The therapist told her she had narcissistic tendencies and severe insecurity issues. When Jessica said those words, I almost laughed because it sounded too perfect, too clean, too much like the ending of a movie where suddenly everything finally makes sense. But Jessica was serious. She sat there twisting the cardboard sleeve around her coffee cup while people moved around us in the background. And for the first time in my life, somebody in my family looked genuinely uncomfortable talking about Vanessa instead of defending her. Jessica told me the therapist believed Vanessa needed constant validation from men because her entire self-worth was tied to attention. According to her, every time she managed to get a guy interested in her, especially a guy who was already dating someone else, she felt powerful for a little while. She felt chosen, important, superior, but the feeling never lasted, so she kept doing it over and over again. Jessica said Aunt Diane had been quietly dealing with the fallout for years. Apparently Vanessa had destroyed friendships, caused fights at work, and even slept with one of her best friend boyfriends in college. I sat there stunned because none of this had ever been talked about openly. In my family, Vanessa had always been protected like some delicate little princess nobody was allowed to criticize. Jessica looked exhausted when she finally leaned forward and lowered her voice. She told me there was more. She said Vanessa had become obsessed with Michael after Thanksgiving because he rejected her. According to Jessica, she had spent days ranting about him, talking about how rude he was and how he thought he was too good for her. Then she started digging through public records online and found out about his prison sentence. That was when she decided to weaponize it against me. Jessica admitted the whole family only panicked because Vanessa framed the story in the most dramatic way possible. She made it sound like I had brought some violent criminal into the house without warning anybody. The truth barely mattered after that because once Grandma Helen got scared, everyone else followed her lead. I remember sitting there feeling numb while Jessica kept talking. Part of me wanted to scream because I had spent almost my entire adult life being blamed for Vanessa's behavior. Every boyfriend she flirted with, every relationship she sabotaged, every humiliation I endured at family gatherings somehow became my fault for not being pretty enough or confident enough or feminine enough. And now, after all these years, somebody was finally admitting the truth out loud. Jessica apologized to me right there in the coffee shop. She said she should have defended me years ago, but nobody in the family wanted to upset Aunt Diane or challenge Vanessa because it was easier to just expect me to tolerate it. I drove home in silence after that meeting. Snow was falling lightly across the highway, and the windshield wipers moved back and forth in this slow rhythm, while I kept replaying my entire life in my head. I thought about every holiday where I sat there pretending not to notice Vanessa touching my boyfriend's arm. Every car ride home where I cried quietly while some man explained why I was overreacting. Every family member who made me feel crazy for noticing what was happening right in front of me. By the time I got home, I was shaking with anger so badly I could barely get my keys into the apartment door. Michael was sitting on the couch watching some terrible action movie when I walked in. The second he looked at my face, he muted the television and asked what happened. I sat beside him and told him everything Jessica said. He listened without interrupting once. That was one thing about Michael. He never rushed to fill silence. He let people speak completely before responding, which sounds simple, but most people do not actually do that. When I finished talking, he wrapped his arm around me and said something that completely broke me open. He said, "Claire, you spent your whole life trying to earn love from people who were comfortable hurting you. That is not family, that is survival." I cried harder than I had cried in years. Not because I was sad exactly, but because hearing someone say the truth so plainly felt overwhelming. Michael held me against his chest while I shook. He did not try to fix it or give me motivational speeches. He just stayed there with me. That night we ordered cheap Chinese food and sat on the floor eating noodles out of cartons while snow piled against the windows outside. It was one of the simplest nights of my life, but I remember thinking I had never felt safer with another human being. A few days later, my mom called again. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Her voice sounded tired, softer than usual. She asked how I was doing, and for once I did not lie and say fine. I told her I was hurt. I told her I was exhausted from spending my entire life being treated like my feelings mattered less than Vanessa's comfort. At first my mom tried defending herself the way she always did. She said things like family is complicated and Vanessa has always struggled with insecurity, but something inside me snapped. I told her I did not care anymore. I said insecurity did not excuse cruelty. I said I was done showing up to family events just to be humiliated while everyone watched silently. There was a long pause on the phone after that. Then my mom started crying quietly. She admitted she knew Vanessa's behavior was wrong for years. She said everybody knew, but confronting her always caused massive drama. And eventually the family slipped into this habit of enabling her because it was easier than dealing with the fallout. Hearing that made me furious all over again because it confirmed exactly what I always suspected. They sacrificed my comfort to keep the peace. My mom apologized, but it felt small compared to decades of damage. Before hanging up, I told her I loved her, but things could not keep going the way they had before. For the next couple months, I kept my distance from most of the family. Meanwhile, my relationship with Michael kept growing stronger. He worked long hours doing construction, and I admired how hard he pushed himself despite constantly feeling judged because of his record. People hear the word felon and immediately decide who you are before you even open your mouth. I watched it happen over and over. Cashiers watching him too closely in stores, employers speaking down to him, neighbors acting uncomfortable after learning about his past. But Michael handled it with this quiet dignity that amazed me. He never pretended he had not made mistakes, he owned them completely. At the same time, he refused to believe those mistakes defined his entire future. Around springtime, he got accepted into a community college program for construction management. I still remember how nervous he looked opening the acceptance email on his phone. His hands were literally shaking. The second he realized he got in, he looked at me with this stunned expression like he could not believe something good was finally happening for him. I threw my arms around his neck and started laughing so hard I almost cried. We celebrated by going to this tiny diner near the river and ordering pie at midnight like a couple of teenagers. Sitting there across from him in that cracked vinyl booth, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I was with somebody who genuinely wanted to build a future with me instead of compete with me, manipulate me, or make me feel replaceable. Then came Easter. My mom invited us both. At first I refused immediately. I told her I was not interested in another disaster, but she surprised me by saying Vanessa would not be there. Apparently after Thanksgiving, things exploded behind the scenes. Aunt Diane confronted her about the manipulation, and for once, several relatives actually backed me up instead of staying silent. Vanessa got angry and stopped speaking to half the family. Honestly, it sounded impossible. I had spent so many years believing nobody would ever challenge her that hearing this felt surreal. Michael told me the decision was mine. He said he would support whatever made me feel safe. After thinking about it for days, I agreed to go, but only for dinner. The entire drive there, I felt sick with anxiety. My body still remembered every terrible holiday before it, every humiliation, every warning sign. But when we arrived, something felt different immediately. My dad hugged me longer than usual. Grandma Helen kissed my cheek and asked Michael questions about school. My uncle apologized awkwardly for judging him too quickly. Nobody mentioned Vanessa at first, almost like the family was collectively trying not to touch a live wire. Dinner was surprisingly peaceful. Michael helped my dad carry dishes into the kitchen afterward, and at one point, I caught my mom watching us with this strange emotional expression. Later, while we were alone rinsing plates together, she quietly admitted she had been wrong about him. She said he treated me better than any man she had ever seen me with. Hearing that hit me harder than I expected because all I wanted growing up was for someone in my family to choose me first. Things slowly improved after that, not perfectly. Families do not magically heal overnight. There were still awkward tensions and years of resentment underneath everything, but people started acknowledging reality instead of pretending. My brother invited Michael to football games. Jessica and I became close again. Even my dad eventually admitted Michael was one of the most hardworking men he had ever met. The more my family got to know him, the harder it became to cling to the image Vanessa created. As for Vanessa, she disappeared for a while. According to family gossip, she bounced between relationships and jobs, constantly chasing excitement and attention. Every now and then I would see photos online of her at clubs or expensive restaurants with different men. For the first time in my life, though, I stopped obsessing over it. I stopped measuring myself against her beauty or charm or ability to manipulate people. Maybe because Michael's rejection finally shattered the illusion I carried for years that every man would eventually choose her over me. About a year later, Michael proposed to me during a hiking trip in northern Michigan. It was early fall, and the trees were exploding with orange and red leaves. We were standing near this overlook above the lake when he got down on one knee with the most terrified expression I have ever seen on a human face. He started rambling nervously about how he did not have much money yet and how his past was messy and complicated. But he wanted to spend the rest of his life making sure I never doubted my worth again. I was crying before he even finished asking. I said yes so fast he started laughing. When we announced the engagement, most of my family reacted warmly. My mom cried. My dad shook Michael's hand and welcomed him officially into the family. Grandma Helen immediately started talking about wedding food like she had been planning it for months. But then came Vanessa. She texted me out of nowhere after almost a year of silence. The message was classic Vanessa, fake sweetness hiding poison underneath. She congratulated me, then casually added that she hoped I understood men with criminal histories often relapse into dangerous behavior. She said she was only concerned for my safety because she cared about me. Reading it made my hands shake, but not from insecurity this time. Just anger, calm, cold anger. For a few minutes I stared at the message wondering if I should ignore it. Old me probably would have. Old me would have swallowed the insult and spent days questioning myself. But something had changed over the last year. I finally understood that staying silent never protected me. It only protected people like Vanessa. So I responded. I told her I spent years believing her behavior was somehow my fault. I told her I let her make me feel ugly, weak, and unworthy because everyone around us normalized what she did. But I was done carrying that shame. I said Michael had more integrity in one finger than most of the polished, successful men she chased for validation. Then I told her something I had secretly wanted to say since I was 23 years old. I said the saddest part about her was that no matter how beautiful she looked on the outside, she still seemed desperately unhappy all the time. She never replied. A month later, Jessica told me Vanessa had a complete meltdown after reading my text. Apparently she screamed at Aunt Diane for hours and accused the entire family of turning against her. But by then, people were tired. The spell she held over everyone for years was finally breaking. Not because she stopped being manipulative, but because people eventually get exhausted pretending not to see obvious truth. Michael and I got married the following summer in a small ceremony near Lake Michigan. Nothing fancy, just close friends, immediate family, good food, and warm weather. Michael wore a dark blue suit that made him look ridiculously handsome. And I remember standing there during our vows thinking about how terrified I used to feel bringing men around my family. Back then, I thought love meant constantly competing for attention and praying not to be abandoned. I did not understand that real love actually feels calm. Real love makes your nervous system quiet. Vanessa did not attend the wedding. She sent no gift and no message. Honestly, that made the day easier. There was no tension, no anxiety, no feeling that I had to monitor every interaction in the room. I could simply exist and be happy. Sometimes people ask me if I resent my family for allowing everything that happened. The answer is complicated. Part of me probably always will. You do not spend years being emotionally dismissed without scars forming somewhere deep inside you. But I also understand families develop unhealthy patterns slowly over time. People avoid conflict. They excuse bad behavior because confronting it feels uncomfortable. Then eventually the dysfunction becomes normal. The biggest lesson I learned was that confidence does not come from being prettier, more charming, or more desirable than somebody else. For years I thought Vanessa kept winning because she was more beautiful than me. But beauty had nothing to do with it. The real problem was that I kept choosing people who were weak enough to be manipulated by shallow attention. Michael was the first person secure enough in himself to see through her instantly. A few months ago, Michael and I were driving home after visiting my parents when he glanced over at me during a stoplight and smiled. He asked if I ever realized how funny our story was. I asked what he meant. He laughed and said the only man tough enough to survive my family ended up being an ex-con from Detroit. I laughed so hard I nearly cried because honestly, he was right. Life is strange like that sometimes. The people who look perfect on paper are not always the ones who love you best. And sometimes the person who sees your value most